So, hello and welcome everybody to another episode of the Sacred Wisdom podcast. In today's episode, we will be discussing the Inheritors of Tartaria. Now, there was a huge amount of technology and free energy technology that the Tartarians used, or the old world. And we're going to discuss where that technology went and how it got integrated into society and has come to the point of where we are now. So I am joined with the amazing Stephen Denman again today to bring his knowledge to you guys. So welcome, Stephen.
Hello, Zach. I hope you're well.
Thank you, brother. I hope you're doing good. Nice to see you. And let's talk about the technology and what Tartaria, or the old world, what sort of technology they were using, and talk about these free energy based systems, these somatic based systems. Let's talk a little bit about that first of all.
Okay, so if you go back to the old world order of Great Tartaria in northern Russia, they were using obviously basically somatic-based occult technologies that were drawing down telluric electricity from the atmosphere above the towns and cities of Great Tartaria. So obviously they had spires, they had domes. These had metal strips that would then run down these buildings into the capacitors in the basement levels of many of these premises, some of which would go into the ground level. And then any excess amounts of this telluric electricity, telluric in the sense of that it's interconnecting with the geomagnetic ley lines, that pretty much all the buildings in all the towns and cities of Great Tartaria in northern Russia, as of all their colonies, were deliberately and specifically constructed upon. And that electricity would be literally diffused and pulsed outwardly into the various farmland or the fertile agricultural lands around the towns and cities to help increase the growth of the fruits, the vegetables, and the cereal crops. So the technology was used for multiple purposes, and when it comes to the obviously the food production aspect in Great Tartaria, northern Russia, they were obviously using it for electroculture.
Yes, which has become a very big thing in the last few years, really, electroculture in society now.
Yes. So if we look over the span of generations, many of these Nordic Tartarians or Tartarian Aryans constructed the luminescent cities such as Molgom, Bayada, Kambulik, and Bargu in northern Tartaria. And the scientists in those various cities were manufacturing the somatic-based occult technologies. So obviously, this was for healing purposes in the healing temples that were eventually repurposed as chapels, churches, and cathedrals, not just in parts of what is the Russian Federation today, but across the Caucasus region, Eastern Europe, Western Europe, North America, Latin America, and so forth. And what they were doing also was developing different types of anti-gravity-based occult technology for the purposes of levitating stone blocks and brick and very heavy construction materials that could be used in the development and of their own, buildings across their towns and cities. So it's a occult technology that isn't really fully understood today, but predominantly it was based around the use of telluric electricity and how that could be used in different productive methodologies, in different manufacturing processes. And of course, the elites and secret societies that are managing planet Earth today don't want Joe Public to know too much about that, simply because that kind of free energy, boundless heating and lighting, would literally, if it was in use today, would set humanity free. All this kerfuffle over the cost of living crisis would evaporate into nothing, which is
the
what
control
it really
structure would fall, basically. Yeah.
Yeah, and then people would have a lot more spare time on their hands, as these Nordic Tartarians or Tartarian Aryans did in the beautiful luminescent towns and cities of Great Tartaria. Okay, so again, we need to remember there were many other expanses across Great Tartaria and northern Russia where the occult technology was consistently applicated. And we have to remember the extensive Piasida region and the Jakutski region of northern Tartaria. There was a huge agricultural reaches with vast orchards of fruits of many different varieties, huge fields of root and green leaf vegetables, and huge amounts of cereal crops, including wild rice, corn, and sorghum. And all of these were given optimal harvestable growth simply by using electroculture that was developed, as I've already mentioned, by the drawing down of the telluric electricity onto the spires and domes of the various buildings in Great Tartaria, and much of that excess electrical energy was then transmitted out into the ground along the actual routes of the geomagnetic ley lines, and help to encourage the cellulose to get maximum growth in those various agricultural products.
So how was the telluric energy getting pulled into the earth? Was it using copper, how was it getting pulled down? Was there mercury vortex engines on the top of them, for example? Or give us an example.
They were using different things like gold-plated metal rods, or perhaps copper rods that were specifically placed in key locations where these geomagnetic ley lines were, to create specific types of frequencies and vibrations that were highly beneficial to the actual growth of the crop. We know from looking at the city of Djukagir in the Zuxari region of northern Tartaria, as with the cities of Dowri and Nika-Eklo in the Oensky region of southern Tartaria, the same kind of electroculture farming practices were also used to create maximum yield in terms of the optimal growth of fruits and vegetables and cereal crops.
And Steve, just for the audience, can you give them a little idea on where you found that information, just so we can give people a few directions where to look at?
I've done extensive research into the blogs and forums that are in the Russian language, and taken actual information from there and translated it into the English language. And I think a lot of people don't realize that if you look at the Russian Federation today, there is a lot of people who are properly qualified academics who are doing serious research into this concept called Great Tartaria, that it really did exist as a civilization, and there were very specific geopolitical and economic reasons why it was deleted off the face of the earth. And so many of the different types of electroculture-based farming practices that were connected to the boundless and free telluric electricity being drawn down into the buildings of the towns and cities across Great Tartaria, whether it was northern Tartaria, eastern Tartaria, southern Tartaria, or western Tartaria, pretty much where Russia and Siberia are today, and therefore Eurasia, this information is known, but again, it's deliberately shut down, ignored, and dismissed. Certainly, it's the kind of information you're not going to see the Smithsonian Institution in Washington, D.C., or even places like Oxford University and Cambridge University in the United Kingdom of Great Britain bothering to look at. They won't scientifically take it seriously at all.
And electroculture is very real. I mean, in the 17th, 18th century, they were doing big research into this.
That's right.
Jean-Antoine Nollet was a Frenchman that actually discovered all this and started researching it and everything. But also in between World War I and World War II, because of all the rations and all the food that was getting given out, the British government started actually investigating electroculture, but very unknown about. People don't really hear about this, do they?
No. So again, it's like there's no acknowledgement given to these Nordic Tartarians or Tartarian Aryans in terms of their scientific abilities, their scientific prowess in when it comes to electroculture to improve farming practices. And we have to remember that we're all told that historically electroculture comes from the time of the Georgian period and the Victorian age. But actually, that's not correct. It actually goes much further back, probably by many centuries, if not aeons of time, to the expanse known today as Great Tartaria in northern Russia. When we look at World War I and World War II, especially when we look at World War II, where there was a lot of encouragement to dig for victory, and that was the actual name on the poster. So everyone had their own allotment gardens, or they turned their own residential back gardens into actual cultivatable gardens to grow fruits and vegetables and so forth. And what happened was, HM government looked at electroculture as a way to sort of speed up and maximize the growth of fruits and vegetables. But obviously what happened was, because that would have actually geopolitically changed the outlook of the British people in reference to what was going on in World War II, from when it started on the 1st of September 1939 all the way through to the 8th of May 1945 with victory in Europe.
Yeah.
that could have been very problematic for the elites and their secret societies. So that's why they never did roll out the uses of electric culture in the villages and towns and cities across the United Kingdom of Great Britain. But what was then given was ration cards.
Yes.
So the exact opposite to electroculture was given. Instead of a massive increase in harvestable, highly nutritious fruits, vegetables, and cereal crops that, where people have plenty of food, there'll be no malnourishment and lack of vitamins and minerals in their diets. People had ration cards. They could hardly eat any meat or fish. There wasn't that many fruits and vegetables to eat. Everybody was losing weight. People were slim. I mean, some people would say that's a good thing. As obesity now, here we are in the 21st century, is a major problem, especially in the Western world. But it's interesting to note that so much of what came from Great Tartaria was quelled, suppressed. It was considered, and then it was pushed aside, because what they wanted was the continuation of this very slow, progressive, industrial revolution leading into constantly increasing industrialization and mechanization, but only if it was making money and it was profiteering, for these corporations, these large companies, these large businesses that the elites and the secret societies owned and managed.
But just quickly on your outlook on that, where do you think that will lead, Steve? Because, I feel this all leads to AI eventually, and sort of cyborgs and integrating AI into the human body.
Right.
This mechanistic way of thinking. What do you think on that?
I don't see it sort of it kind of panning out that way myself. I think that
I don't think it will, but I think that that's almost like where it wants to get to, because I can't see how this is productive, separating us from the human spirit, because we are, that is what we are. And if the more we do that, the more dysfunctional things will become.
Well, the human body cannot be animated without a soul personality. So, and the mind is the electromagnetic interface between the biological and corporeal form known as a Homo sapien or a human, and the indwelling, enshrined soul personality, the sovereign based soul personality that's really an extension, and it's an individualized expression of the universal creator. So no, I don't see artificial intelligence or AI being really any real problem or a threat in any way. I think there's a lot of paranoia concerning AI. And and when we go back to what happened, obviously, on the 20th of February 1954 with the Greada Treaty that was agreed upon between the Rigelian Greys, also known as the Orion Greys or the Greadans, and President David Dwight Eisenhower at Muroc Army Airfield, that became known as Edwards Air Force Base in Kern County in Southern California. We have to really understand that's really where the emergence of artificial intelligence came from. It was off the occult technology that was coming from those negatively based extraterrestrials that came from the planet Greada, which orbits Rigel A in the Orion constellation. So it's a totally different type of occult technology to that which was used by these Nordic Tartarians or Tartarian Aryans from northern Russia. There was really a benevolent form of occult technology that was for the well-being and the optimal health, psychological and biological health of all the residents, the inhabitants of Great Tartaria. And I think we should honor, really, for example, the city of Defet in the Gilead region of eastern Tartaria, and also the city of Makojskoy in the Ostaki region of Western Tartaria, because again, they really were involved, the inhabitants were involved in the use of these electroculture farming practices. And you just imagine all these different cities across Great Tartaria, whether it's Northern Tartaria, Eastern Tartaria, Southern Tartaria, Western Tartaria, the intense luminescence in the twilight as the sun was setting throughout the nighttime would have been absolutely magical. And the different colors we use, different types of light fittings that we use, different lamps, on walls,
completely different frequency. I mean, we both remember that time before the digital age and the analog age, and I remember them summer evenings, how different reality was, and how it's changed so much. It does sadden me that, because as much as we progressed in technology and mobile phones and all these different types of technical equipment, the internet, we've lost this sense of self in this energy that I remember as a child and being very connected. It's something I can reflect on. It's a very surreal experience because I almost feel like my childhood was another life, you know. And maybe it was to some level, but, you know, very interesting. But the frequencies really interact, you know, and that's what I think would have been a huge difference with Tartaria and the way technology was used. It was used in a much more harmonious way. It seems that EMFs and all these signals are quite aggressive to the human spirit. They're knocking the frequencies out, right?
Exactly. And I think the two flags, you know, the actual royal flag of Great Tartaria and the common people's flag of Great Tartaria. So obviously the griffin on a yellow background represented the royalty, the monarchy, the kings, the queens, the princes, the princesses that ruled over Great Tartaria and northern Russia. But then you look at the other flag, which was an owl on a yellow background, representing that the common people were the keepers of sacred knowledge. They were the keepers of all this occult technology. They were the ones that were the scientists, the technologists, the engineers.
Just out of interest, Steve, so the both of them flags were both used at the same time, or were they used?
They were simultaneously used. And I believe that's the only civilization and nation on planet Earth that ever did that. And I think it represented that the common people, the residents, the occupants, both individually and in terms of communities and societies in Great Tartaria, were given such emphasis. They were seen as important. When we look at the Western world now, and we look at the royalty we have, we know that they don't give a damn about Joe Public. It's all just a stage act. It's a stagecraft in front of the mainstream media. Yep. Whereas I believe that the royalty, the Tartarian monarchs, I believe that they were honored, revered. They were exemplified by the common people, but the common people themselves were showing tremendous reverence and respect by the royalty. I think it was a co-collaborative process that where both aspects of the civilization of Great Tartaria recognized each other's relevance and importance, and they were seen as equal but different.
There's been a lot of amazing inventors such as Nikola Tesla.
That's right.
Nikola Tesla did some remarkable stuff, but also Victor Schauberger. So give us some details about these people, because they seem to bring this technology into the new world and from the old world. So, and very interesting how they got their experiments as well. I'll explain a little bit about Tesla in a minute, but tell us a bit about these guys.
Well, I think just to give a little bit of background on this, we can say this is a conspiracy theory, and I'm not saying that I'm scientifically correct in what I'm about to posit, what I'm about to theorize over and state. But if we look at the work of Michael Newton in his two incredible books, Journey of Souls and Destiny of Souls, and also we look at Delors Cannon.
So Delors Cannon and Michael Newton, they were regressional hypnotherapists, and that they both died unfortunately now, but they basically told people about their past lives, previous lives, and they traveled a lot back to Atlantis, didn't they? And they also did, some very interesting worlds. So carry on, Steve. Sorry, I just wanted people to know about what they actually did as a profession.
So when you look at the work of Michael Newton and Delors Cannon, many of their client studies show that other people's lifetimes had been in different civilizations where spirituality kind of developed in conjunction with occult technology, such as the civilization of Atlantis is an example. But when we take a look at this idea that perhaps many of these soul personalities are the scientists and the technologists and the engineers from Great Tartaria and northern Russia, literally left behind the deceased bodies of these individuals, and perhaps we can just from one second or so, just consider the idea, perhaps they reincarnated in the bodies of various individuals such as Nikola Tesla and Victor Schauberger. And we have to remember that Nikola Tesla was born on the 10th of July, 1856, in the village of Smiljan in the western Lika region of southwestern Croatia. And so it's interesting, the actual year of his birth coincides really with the final days and destruction of Great Tartaria. Much of it was literally fading into iniquity. It was becoming almost a legend, even though it had been a real civilization for many thousands of years.
Just so people know, Nikola Tesla, he did something quite remarkable at the Buffalo Fair, I think in 1903 in New York. And that was where he actually used hydroelectric energy from Niagara Falls, and he transmitted it, I believe, just over 20 miles to New York City. Now, there has never been an explanation to how he got it to that actual fair. And then to add to that, at something that was called I think it was called the New York Banquet, the Buffalo Buffet, something along them lines. But basically, it was Nikola Tesla's the elites were celebrating Nikola Tesla's inventions. And he went up on stage and gave a 20-minute talk. And during this talk, he explained that he got his inventions. He would put a notepad by his bed at night. He would go to sleep and he would wake up and his inventions would be written in that book. And he just followed order to what was written in that book. Now, that is completely far out. Maybe he was lucid dreaming. Maybe he was channeling. Maybe he was just writing at a very late time at night. But whatever was going on, that he was a very interesting character with what he brought to people.
You could even theorize that perhaps that in the astral plane, some of the soul personalities of those individuals who've been scientists and technologists and engineers from Great Tartaria were psychically or telepathically transmitting into his mind, his subconscious mind, while he slept, information, so that when he awoke, he was able to write all this down. Again, that's obviously just complete speculation. It's not based on any fact and can't be proven. But it's interesting to note when you look at all these different, the variety of inventions that he had, such as the Tesla coil, the induction motor, the magnifying transmitter, the wireless power transfer device, the Tesla oscillator, the Tesla valve, the death ray, the teleforce device, the rotating magnetic field device, and the neon lamp. These were all just variations really on different forms of occult technology that had existed in one capacity or another in Great Tartaria. But when you take a look at what happened was a decision was made by the elites and secret societies. So in regards to, were they going to invest in all the scientific research and develop as commercial products? And as part of a literally a new world that was being developed, the scientific brilliance of Nikola Tesla, or were they going to go with Thomas Edison? Because with the discoveries and inventions of Nikola Tesla, he had already stated very clearly that it was going to be creating boundless free electricity that Joe Public could use in any country on planet Earth. Well, the elites can't make money from that. That was their main, because how could they profit from that? They couldn't. Whereas the actual scientific developments that Thomas Edison was involved in were going to result in them making a clear profit. They could actually charge human beings in different villages, towns, and cities across planet, especially in first world countries, for the use of electricity at a cost of living, and they could make very hefty, very decent profits from doing so and enrich themselves. So you can see how this is always reverting back to money, to control, power. It's all, and it's steering society. But then that ultimately is about mind control. So if you're charging people for the use of electricity, and the telluric electricity was endless and boundless in Great Tartaria in northern Russia, as with so many of its colonies across planet Earth. And then suddenly that's all destroyed, dismantled, deleted, repurposed over many years. And it's scrubbed from the history books. It's this class is another wild and ludicrous conspiracy theory. What you're left with is the elites and secret societies holding the various types of occult technology, but it's basically been removed from public access. And then they can roll out what they're doing. And then obviously if everybody thinks, well, it's costing money to use electricity, everybody becomes, within a number of generations, they start accepting that, there's obviously a cost of living on planet Earth. Instead of accepting that we're all actually sovereign, spiritual beings. We're all the children of the universal creator. We are divine in origin, and we have a sovereign right, and therefore a divine right as Homo sapiens, or human beings, to live on this earth. We're here to protect the planet Earth and its ecosystems. But the fact is that, if you want to look at it in terms of an esoteric perspective, all planets and moons have geomagnetic ley lines. All of them have the capacity to be used, optimally used, to draw down boundless telluric electricity. So that's actually kind of inbuilt. It's an integral electromagnetic aspect of planet Earth, which is being deprived from human beings. So it is ultimately about mind control. And secondly, it's done for socioeconomic reasons, again, but that then loops back into really another form of control.
The guy I'd really love to talk about is the Austrian forest caretaker who you introduced me to, which is Victor Scharberger, absolutely incredible guy who's kind of been pushed back. So talk about that, Steve, because this is really good stuff.
Well, just to start with, we can theorize again, was his sole personality actually a sole personality that had come from that of a scientist or a technologist or engineer in Great Tartaria? We will never know. But just say that theoretically that could be possible. So Victor Schauberg, he was born on the 30th of June, 1885, in the village of Holzschlag of the Schwarzen am Bommerwald, midst the Rohrbach district of Upper Austria. Now, he was fascinated from an early age in the ecology, the landscapes of Austria. He became a forest warden and he studied biology, but he specifically became really fascinated with waterways, with the torrential flow of rivers and waterfalls. He duplicated those kinetic processes in Mother Nature.
Yeah, his famous saying, just so people know, was comprehend and duplicate, which is...
That's right, yeah. Yes. And he invented what's known as the hydroelectric water turbine and also various kinds of vortex engines. These then actually became coined as forms of vortex technology, which in many, many ways was another form of occult technology, because it was allowing the use of levitation and therefore anti-gravity propulsion.
But so he got this from studying nature. So he was actually understanding this from looking at nature. So I think he spent 30 years in nature, that's apparently, and actually studied the movement. And this is something we can all do, right?
Yeah, he spent a long time. He was into orienteering and camping, and he was a classic kind of European or Austrian backwoodsman. He was fascinated by the forest and woodlands of Austria. He loved the Alpine mountains, and he explored all these different rivers and the lakes and the shorelines of all the various topographies around that area in Central Europe, because he was just fascinated with trying to really applicate these natural processes in Mother Nature in terms of, developing new kinds of alternative scientific and technological developments that could be made commercially, productive, could be then rolled out and could be used by ordinary human beings. And as usual, same with Nikola Tesla, much of what he developed was never commercially mass produced, was not allowed, wasn't funded, wasn't promoted, and for most people he just disappeared into history. And most people these days wouldn't even know who he is unless you give them a website on his information, or you discuss his writings and some of the books that he published.
So Steve, these inventors that have been around, there's been some incredible people that have been on this planet. One of the guys was called Edward Lee Scalanin, and he built what was called Coral Castle in Florida. Now, this was just an incredible structure that was built completely out of stone, and there was no explanation to how these stones actually were put in place and how this was built. And there was apparently no people observed him with any trucks or any kind of builders or anybody on site, but he managed to build this whole kind of stone structure, didn't he? So tell us more about Edward.
Well, he was born Edward Lead Skalnins, who became better known as Edward Lead Skalnin. He was born in the 12th of January, 1887, in the Stamariena parish of the Gulbene municipality in northeastern Latvia.
Wow.
Now, he emigrated to the United States of America, and, nobody ever saw him actually construct Coral Castle. And he was a very small individual, way below average height. He was very slim, didn't have a lot of muscle mass. He was never observed by any of the residents of where he lived, actually in collaboration with any kind of construction firms who were helping him, build Coral Castle. There wasn't any crane.
There was only
arms
one witness. There was only one witness apparently, and that was two children that saw him holding a cone, and he had this strange kind of sound on a frequency, and these rocks were moved. He could. I don't know, but apparently, I do believe he moved the rocks around. He was using levitation techniques.
So if we posit the idea that possibly he was another person who had a soul personality that had reincarnated from Great Tartaria in northern Russia, and that somehow he either invented this, what has become known as an anti-gravity resonator. It was a cone shaped, it was metallic, it's not known what actual specific metal it was made of, but apparently it had a spiral, groove-like spiral pattern on it. So again, I will theorize here, was that designed to control and manipulate somatic-based sound waves?
That also relates back to the Egyptians, because the Egyptians in their hieroglyphics and drawings, stone drawings, they actually had cones in their hands, didn't they?
Yes, they did. And I believe many other cultures also had cones. I think if you look back at some of the petroglyphs from the Fertile Crescent and the Middle East, you look at the time of ancient Sumeria and Akkad and Babylon and Assyria, there's some very unusual petroglyphs that show, I don't know, temple priests or perhaps royalty holding what looked like cones of some type or another. But again, a lot of that information is hard to come by. You've kind of got to do a lot of research to find a lot of these images on the internet.
So with Coral Castle, tell us more about the Coral Castle.
Yeah, so Coral Castle was constructed in the Miami-Dade County of southern Florida. So the only two people, as you've already mentioned, that actually witnessed Edward Leedskalnin with this kind of metallic cone-like device were these two American children in that part of southern Florida. So it is possibly the case that he was using an anti-gravity resonator to lift huge stone blocks into place. And obviously it was a project that he worked on for many decades. And as you know, it was all done in honor of his wife. It was a way of honoring her memory. So Coral Castle was really an open air sculpture, for want of a better phrase, that was produced by Edward Leedskalnin. This little gentleman who come all the way from northeastern Latvia. Very unusual.
Managed to build this whole castle. Yeah, interesting.
Over many decades. Yeah, very unusual. But
there was also a guy I just want to mention, Steve, is John Hutchinson, because he's very interested. In the 70s and 80s, he did experiments with sound, and he actually was able, maybe not in the same way, he didn't use cones and stuff like this, but he was using frequencies to lift objects. And very interesting what he came across and some of the experiments he did. His information's out there, but it's not really acknowledged, I don't feel.
And that's what's so unbelievable, is that there are so many videos of the fantastic scientific work of John Hutchinson.
Yeah.
On YouTube, for example, and also on many other social media platforms. And you think you can visibly see in the recordings how his actual technology actually functions, and how
he actually got items to explode as well, to disintegrate. So through the use of sound, far out.
So we come on to another individual that I think many people will have heard of. That's Wilhelm Reich.
Yes.
Now, this individual, truly fascinating gentleman. He was born on the 24th of March, 1897, in the village of Dobzhai of the Lviv Oblast in eastern Ukraine. Right. Now, although he was genetically and ancestrally, an Austrian from his, in terms of his family background, he obviously was born in eastern Ukraine. So that's interesting also, that you have this individual called Wilhelm Reich, who then goes ahead and invents the orgone energy accumulator. And he develops a great understanding of the human aura, his understanding and perceptivity of human psychology, human sexuality. And it's very interesting to note that, when you remember the music video that was directed by Julian Doyle, which was actually conceived by Terence Vance Gilliam. Most people know him better as and Terry Gilliam. And obviously he was part of the crew that developed Monty Python's Flying Circus.
Time Bandits as well.
Time Bandits. Yeah, I think that was all from the company
Brazil.
called Handmade Films. Is that right?
Yeah. Who George Harrison actually was the executive producer on.
That's right. That's fascinating. That's brilliant. And so in this music video that was directed by Julian Doyle, a lady by the name of Catherine Bush, most know her more commonly by the name of Kate Bush. Now, in this video, the Canadian actor known as Donald McMichael Sutherland plays the role of Wilhelm Reich, and Kate Bush actually plays the role of his younger son, Peter Reich. The video was filmed on the 16th of August 1985 at the Vale of Whitehorse in South Oxfordshire. Now, the orgone energy accumulator that's seen in the music video was actually positioned on what is known as Dragon Hill, which is immediately below the Uffington White Horse. Now, that's some very interesting occult symbolism there. Yeah, in terms of the ley lines that are running through Dragon Hill and the Uffington White Horse. Was that done by accident? Was that done deliberately? Nobody knows. But it's interesting that you have this incredibly prolific songwriter, Kate Bush, who writes, very beautiful music, and then this very profound, quite abstract and very intellectual music video about the life of Wilhelm Reich and his orgone energy accumulator and his relationship with his son, Peter Reich. Okay, we composite with him. Again, was he another soul personality who had originally been in a biological form of a being that could be defined as a Nordic Tartarian in northern Russia? Had he been a scientist, a technologist, or an engineer? Again, I'm just putting that idea out there. I'm not saying it's correct. I don't want it to come across as a conspiracy theory, but it's very interesting that we have all these gentlemen, of European descent, coming to the fore with these incredible scientific inventions that have largely been ignored or deliberately sidelined or repurposed by Western science. They've not been given full acknowledgement of much of what they developed. Yeah. And it's almost as like the elites and the secret societies, they cannot just accept and acknowledge that great Tartarian northern Russia was this motherland of spiritual eloquence that was focused on the Christ consciousness, that had free energy systems, that were experts there in the use of telluric electricity for different applications, such as electric culture, to optimize harvestable fruits, vegetables, and cereal crops, and many other reasons, obviously, like the healing temples that were all constructed that were then repurposed as chapels, churches, and cathedrals across many parts of planet Earth.
I mean, just talking about the Vamanas, Steve, that this stuff, this was blew my mind with these existed not too far away either. These objects, they seem so surreal though, like large, huge rocks, like moving up, right?
Yeah, I think when you look at the use of mercury vortex engines, you look at the use of highly advanced anti-gravity based occult technology, and many of the woodcuts and the ink drawings or diagrams from certain geographic locations across Great Tartaria in northern Russia show these huge airships of various geometric designs, some of which look actually like airships, that the Zeppelin type airships. And there's many different designs, some of which could be classed as disc shape, so you can say flying saucer shape. But then we have to remember, look, the renowned director of the International Academy of Sanskrit Research, Gomatham Ritapuran Ravikanta Joshua, also known as G.R. Joshua, he carried out a huge amount of scientific work at that facility in the city of Mysore or Mysuru in the Karnataka region, or the Karunadu province in southwestern India, that resulted in the compilation of the Vamanika Sastra, or the Traversa Subject Manual.
You say it so well, Steve.
Oh, thank you. And this actual manual was then compiled, put together throughout August 1952. Now, Gomatham Ritapuran Ravikanta Joshua, he asserts very clearly that it was actually information that had been written down, psychically transmitted and received, and then written down by an individual known as Pandit Subbaraya Sastri, who dictated all the information that became the Vamanika Sastra, or Traversa Subject Manual, from January 1918 through to around, I think, December of 1923. And
Wow.
there were different types of Vimana or traverses. Vimana, obviously being a word from the Sanskrit language, were
Mm.
described and how they were able to be navigated, the consoles that were on board, the use of Mercury vortex engine for anti-gravity purposes, i.e. levitation, and how these various Vimana were able to be propulsed through airspace over India and other parts of the Asian continent. So, you know, again, are we looking at any connection between the occult technology from the scientists, the technologists, and the engineers of Great Tartaria in northern Russia in regards to Vedic Hinduism and Vedic India? We know there are connections that is being purported from Russian folklore and Russian mythology. There are certain Pacific connections between Eurasia, including obviously Russia and Siberia.
Do you think
And
some of the large Indian temples could actually take off? Because some of these temples look like Vimanas. They're built in a certain position,
yeah,
direction. And I've even noticed on some exploration videos I've seen on YouTube that they actually got turning, moving parts, some of the stone. Very interesting.
I think they were Vedic based interpretations of Tartarian architecture that were used to specifically channel and store huge amounts of telluric electricity. And I would say, like with Great Tartaria in northern Russia, when you look at the Indian subcontinent and you look at all the vast Hindu temples that were built, I mean, the most incredible kinds of Vedic architecture,
For
you
sure.
can say, were they built again on geomagnetic ley lines or the intersection of geomagnetic ley lines that are built literally on dimensional portals that open up into the astral plane?
Mm.
And again, this is all theorization. It's just, you can say, pure speculation. We don't have any clear scientific proof of that. But then again, there's a lot of this we don't have clear scientific proof of. Like, we're speculating over these four individuals of
I mean, the
European.
whole of history to some level is speculation. A
Yeah,
lot of people don't, it's a perspective. There's
yeah,
probably a lot more to it and a lot more different angles. It's kind of the way people
yeah.
see news as well. It's not always, how a story is presented. There's other stories around that have contributed to that. But fascinating, Steve. And
Yeah.
the more we talk, the more visuals and interest I have in this subject. I mean, it's incredible, the information. So
Yeah.
thank you for this talk. And is there anything else you'd like to add?
I think on a positive note, I'd like to conclude with this information. I think when you look back to people like Nikola Tesla and Victor Schauberger and so many other, shall we say, scientists and inventors who haven't been given full historical acknowledgement by the academics of Western science, I do believe that's going to change over the next few years, especially if we do enter a golden age after 2035 or 2036, maybe after 2042, 2043, but we're not that far away from that.
That's quite a long, it's only 20 years. Don't worry.
Well, in terms of world history, it's pretty good.
No, in world, right.
Yeah.
Yeah, of course.
And I mean, a lot happens, and the rise and fall of civilizations over thousands of years has been incredible.
Well, you can see it happening now with the changes
change.
happening on the planet. You can see the way things are shifting around. People are getting exported, migrated to other countries. It's happening all around us. You only have to pay attention to it. But
I think the orphan train movement was just what was very well documented. There was so much film footage and photographic evidence at the time. And it became almost a social habit for millions of Americans to go to the portside facilities and photograph and film all these newcomers to the United States of America and Canada from Western Europe, from countries, like France and Germany, and obviously Spain, Portugal, and Italy, and many other countries. And it was like they were literally aliens in an alien landscape, because it was, for them, it's quite frightening, even though they were meeting many of their relatives in their different communities in places like New York City and Chicago and so forth. But yeah, so I would say that this has been an ongoing process where communities and societies have been deliberately separated and divided. You have mass immigration coming in, you have mass emigration, that's obviously vast amounts of people leaving, and it creates this sort of fragmentation in terms of demographics. It creates an unsettling
Misplaces
feeling for
people,
many,
puts people's also the DNA of
and
people and their culture.
disorientation
You
and
know, it removes it, takes it around, and
cultural
disconnects
displacement.
people.
Yeah. And so this, I think a lot of this actually does go back to the time of Great Tartaria. It goes back to all this incredible occult technology, the cymatic-based occult technology and all the rest of it that was developed across these beautifully dazzling luminescent towns and cities in Great Tartaria across northern Russia, where, just imagine what the nighttime was like in those beautiful balmy summers, how the skies above these towns and cities were illuminating all these beautiful different colors, and how peaceful and tranquil, and all the different congregations meeting in these healing temples. It's just really quite beautiful what had once existed. And I think these scientists, whether they had soul personalities that had specifically and directly reincarnated from, being individuals who were scientists and technologists and engineers and so forth in Great Tartaria or not, they literally really put out their information that really questions the official narrative of much of Western science. But of course, because it does, that's not wanted by, shall we say, the elites and the secret societies, because for control purposes, human consciousness in their perception, in their minds, has to be always regulated and controlled and steered in certain directions. That's all I've really got to say.
Well, I think you're right, Steve. I think, in time we are going to get to that positive place where these systems are reintegrated into society. But as we all know, we are on a soul journey, and every individual soul journey is experiencing life in a different way. And comparing one to the next is quite difficult in the world we live in, because we all have different dynamics.
Being a human being is a complex thing. Human beings are emotionally very complex. And, as many of the extraterrestrials and ultra terrestrials know, they perceive Homo sapiens or human beings as being individuals that have a very wide range of emotional and expressions and feelings. It can be a real challenge being a human being here on planet Earth. I do think things are about to start to change in a very positive way in the next few years. I really believe that.
I do. And I feel that too, Steve. And it's not just my optimism. I am a very optimistic person. I do genuinely feel that. I feel that the turbulence we're going through, we're getting to a much clearer space. So thank you, Stephen. Thanks for the amazing words. And if anybody would like to purchase our book, Mysterious Realities, it's available in ebook and paperback on Amazon. And you can also purchase on my website in the links below. Thank you so much, Stephen. And it's a bye from me.
And it's goodbye from me.